September the 11th, the marketing department of Eli, Lilly and Co. named fluoxetine fluoxetine. On September the 11th this year, the New York Times had editorials, one of which was clearly on September the 11th, and the other one just beneath it was on the fact that pharmaceutical companies are hiding the data from their clinical trials, and this can't go on. The marketing departments are in the business of trying to work out, okay, this drug is going to become an antidepressant, and even before any clinical trials get done, they've worked out who it is who are going to be the clinical trialists, where these trials will happen, which journals the articles from these clinical trials will end up in, who the authors will be. Long before the clinical trial's done, the marketing department's working out just who the authors will be. Who are the people that we want up there speaking to this pill, speaking to this drug. And they're doing all this because they're in the business of trying to capture the marketplace in the way that Hoover once captured the vacuum cleaner marketplace. To this day, I actually tell my kids to go up and hoover the carpet or whatever, and they look at me. Well, they don't actually look at me. Even though they haven't ever seen a Hoover in their life, they know what I mean. It's a vacuum cleaner, even though these days we don't have Hoovers in the UK very much. They've been kind of replaced. But the idea is you want to get in there and capture the way people think about the products in this area. Now, there must at some point be some fundamental opposition between what marketing departments do and between the processes of science. And the reason to go through all of this is I think you guys shouldn't really be in the business of saying we're just pro-therapy and anti-pills and things like that. You should be in the business of trying to take these guys on the basis of the science, that they're violating a bunch of ethical and scientific norms here, because actually the point behind science supposedly is that it's trying to break the consensus that people come to. It's about saying, well, look, this is what people think these days, that the sun rises up in the east and goes down in the west. Well, I don't believe that, and I'm going to prove them wrong. Okay? But one of the key issues here, one of the key ways to actually control the marketplace has been this. And all of the companies, all of the marketing departments, as you know, do just the same thing. They say being clinically depressed or being anxious or having PTSD or social phobia, and it's odd the way all of these problems actually stem from the same source, is all about having lowered serotonin levels or having a chemical imbalance of one sort or the other. Once you control the marketplace by getting people out there to think that, you marginalize therapy. I mean, it becomes much less obvious why you would do therapy, which has no obvious known effects on the serotonin system. This view has no scientific basis to it at all. There hasn't ever been any evidence in favor of it. And really what you need to see it as is an updated version of this. It's just the the volume of the vesicles, it goes the other way this time, okay? But what you've got here is a myth in both instances. What we need to look at is why a myth like this can be as potent as it is. We need to try and look at, well, what happened to replace this myth? Because if you're going to replace the serotonin myth, you're going to have to do something like whatever was done to actually replace this myth. And one of the issues about this myth and the serotonin myth is in both instances, what we're on about here is some aspect of social control. Now, just what aspect and who gains are issues that I'm sure you'll all have views on. This is the kind of model the industry would wish you to believe. That's up here on the top. The research happens in the universities, and it happens in hospitals where they do clinical trials, and only later on in the process do you get the marketing departments of the pharmaceutical companies involved. And then they take the genuine scientific data that comes out of all this and they run with it. But in actual fact, what happens is down in the bottom here, at least what's been happening for the last 25 years or so at least, is down here in the bottom. The marketing departments are involved right from the start. They're the ones that name the drug. They're the ones that actually decide what indications this drug will be developed up for. Now, this is IMS Health, and they collect data for the pharmaceutical companies. This is and what I think is really superb about this is if there are those of you in the room who don't believe in Freud anymore, you can see quite clearly IMS Health do. This is a superbly psychodynamic image. What these guys do is they track when people like me even begin to think about changing from prescribing Paxil to Zoloft. If drugs have been, the FBI and CIA and people like this don't know who's in the Tora Bora caves these days, but if whoever is in there is on pills of some sort, IMS Health know just exactly what they're getting, okay? You wouldn't believe their reach. It is really extraordinary, okay? Now, this is what you'd actually expect the industry to be doing. You'd think that the pharmaceutical companies would know just how many scripts have been used for their pills, just who's using them where, who we need to bring to the conferences in the Caribbean because they haven't been using our pill recently, for instance. But you'd also expect, perhaps, that some of the rest of us somewhere would know how many people end up on the drugs. Industry knows how many drugs, how many pills, how many scripts there are, how much they make, but in actual fact, no one here in the US, not the FDA, not anyone, knows, or it would seem has much interest in, how many people here in the US are actually on these pills. Along with a co-worker, Graham Aldred, we've been working for the last year or so on trying to convert scripts into people. And what we've come up with is this, that at this point in time, there's roughly, well, what you actually see here is the growth of Prozac, Paxil, and Zoloft here, just here in the US. What this translates into is that we estimate that at least 50 million people here have had Prozac, Paxil, or Zoloft. That in any one year, there are 16 million people on one or other of these drugs. Now, that's not taking into account all of the other SSRIs or all of the other antidepressants. As of 2 or 3 years ago, for the first time, the number of people who are on Prozac, Paxil, and Zoloft who have been on them for a year or more changed. The growth in the use of these drugs now comes from people who are on them for a year, or 3 years, or 5 years, or more. What's growing is actually the marketplace of people who are physically hooked to the drugs as opposed to a growth of more people being put on the drugs. But one of the interesting things, now, you'd have thought if we were in the business of actually being scientific about how we use these drugs, we'd know how many people were on them, but we don't. But even more to the point is this. What hopefully you've seen is how industry get hold of us and shape the thoughts we have, shape the world views we have, try to make sure that the ideas we have fit in with views that suit their interests. And it's very, very hard for people to step out of that and say, you know, well, I think you're wrong. I think actually what happens to people who are depressed is they've just had a very bad cab ride out from New York City and they take ages to recover. Or maybe that's PTSD that I have at the moment. But anyway, but one of the things that may help people step outside that framework is when you put a person on a pill and you see things go wrong. You see them become hostile. You see them become actively suicidal. You see them kill themselves. You might begin to think, well, hey, you know, what people say these drugs do, or what people think about how these drugs work, may actually be wrong. Maybe I need to be looking at all this fresh. This is how science is supposed to proceed. But in actual fact, only roughly 1 in 100, and perhaps quite a bit less, of the people who put on SSRIs have gone on to kill themselves have been reported here in the US to the FDA or to any of the pharmaceutical companies. You guys track the fate of parcels through the post 100 times more accurately than you track the fate of people put on these drugs. You cannot call this field scientific, and in fact the very possibility of being scientific seems to be lost to us almost. Let me end there. Thank you very much.